Very welcome everybody to this STM webinar on Orchid. Happy to see so many people, and also very happy to welcome Chris Schillem, Julie Petro, Ivo Wijnbergen and Tom de Meronville of Orchid, who were prepared to give us this special presentation on their new strategies, on their new plans, especially what it can mean for publishers, and what kind of benefits they can bring to publishers. With that, and no further ado, I'd like to clear the floor, and I think Chris, you're the first one to go ahead.
Yeah, I'm actually not going to say much today. Some of you might be glad to hear, but it's great to see so many familiar faces on the call and a few new people. Thank you very much to AFCO and STM for letting us come and talk to you all. You know, one of the things we've been doing since I joined Orchid about a year ago, I'm the new executive director, for those of you who don't know. And one of the things we've been busy with is re-articulating our strategy. So we're going to publish a new strat plan in the next few weeks, but we're going to give you a little preview today. And also, you know, more clearly articulating and defining our value propositions to each of our stakeholder groups. And obviously publishers are one of our very important stakeholder groups. So we've tended, I think, in the past to be a bit generic in Orchid about how we talked about what we do and the value we deliver. So again, this is a little bit of a preview of our value proposition work, but we're very interested to hear from you, or whether this makes sense, whether this resonates, whether there are things that you think are missing. So with that, let me stop talking. And let me hand over to Julie, who's going to take you through the agenda for today.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone, and thanks for having us here today. I'm going to start us out with a short introduction or a reintroduction about who Orchid is, what we do, and as Chris was mentioning, a short preview of our soon-to-be published strategic plan, which lays out how we plan to build commitment to and engagement with Orchid as an essential element of the research experience, both for researchers and member organizations. Chris is going to revisit the history of publishers and Orchid. Then Ivo is going to talk about Orchid's specific value to publishers, including new value propositions and benefits, as well as specific use cases and workflows, and other ways you might get more out of your existing integrations. We hope to leave plenty of time at the end for some discussion, and this is going to be led by Tom, and we want to talk about how we can work together from here. Most of you probably remember the recent article published by the Scholarly Kitchen, Why Publishers Should Care About Persistent Identifiers. And in that article, they talk about how most major manuscript submission systems have Orchid integrations. And there's something around 2,000 journals that now require Orchid IDs for the contributing author, and there are thousands more that request them. But even with that, the article talks a lot about how most publishers probably aren't realizing the full potential of PIDs. Publishers were among the first of the broader scholarly community to recognize the possibilities promised by Orchid's vision of a world where all who participate in research, scholarship, and innovation are uniquely identified and connected to their contributions across disciplines, borders, and time. So ultimately, we're hoping that this conversation with you today helps you understand better how we plan to bring value to that vision so that you can help researchers save time and claim credit for their work. So for those of you who are relatively new to Orchid, let me tell you a little more about us. We are a global research infrastructure organization registered in the United States. We launched our registry in 2012 and had an ambitious goal of reaching financial break-even, which we did just 7 years later in 2019. So what that means is we're now 100% sustained by fees from our member organizations. And we owe a lot of our success to being open to participation by all. And that's why we're community built and still community governed by a board of directors that are representative of our membership with wide stakeholder representation. Our day-to-day operations are supported by a dedicated professional staff of, I think we're around 38 people now. So still kind of a small crew, and we are spread out over, I think, about 15 countries now. We're pretty widespread. And our mission is to enable transparent and trustworthy connections between researchers, their contributions, and their affiliations by providing a unique, persistent identifier for individuals to use as they engage in research, scholarship, and innovation activities. We do this by providing 3 interrelated services. The first is the Orchid ID, or just the Orchid. People use both interchangeably, but regardless of what you call it, it's the free, unique, persistent 16-digit identifier that researchers own and control forever. And it distinguishes and disambiguates them from every other researcher throughout their career. Second is the Orchid record connected to the Orchid ID that stores the researcher's professional information, like publications, of course, and affiliations, grants, peer review, service, memberships, etc. And finally, a set of application programming interfaces, or APIs, as well as the services and support of communities of practice that enable interoperability between the Orchid record and member organizations. It's through these APIs or the integrations that researchers can choose to allow connect of their Orchid record with their contributions and affiliations. And I think, yes, okay. There are more than 3,500 client systems that use our member and public APIs. On average, we handle about 1 million API hits per day, sometimes 2 million on our busiest days. This is just the member API. Our public API handles even more than this. And in case you or any of your developers are interested, we have a web page that displays service status indicators for things like OAuth token endpoints, member API record check and search. And we're looking into more ways to proactively raise awareness of and be transparent about our scalability and resilience. So to that end, we're exploring a platform that will allow us to share even more system metrics like response time and other stability issues. I'm going to wait for this to load. Orchid and our community of researchers and member organizations, we've already accomplished so much together in the nearly 10 short years since we've launched our registry. The critical mass of global participation we've earned shows just how much our vision has resonated with the community, and we are committed to enabling that community to realize the value of the vision that they invested in. Late last year, we hit an important milestone of 10 million Orchid records, and right now we're well over 12 million. And of course, we're really proud of that achievement, but we're well aware that that number doesn't tell us about how Orchid records are being used, only that they exist. So this past year, we've begun shifting our focus to metrics like ones you see on this slide, such as the yearly active records, or how many IDs have been created, authenticated, or updated over the past year, as well as users that have granted update permissions to trusted organizations. In other words, how many record holders have connected their records to other systems. The data on this slide was updated yesterday, and every time I talk about this, I have to update these numbers again because it just keeps going up and up and up. So we're using these metrics as well as others to figure out the best ways to help stakeholders leverage as much value as they can from Orchid, whether that's helping researchers get the most out of their records or helping members get the most out of their memberships. And while I'm here, I just want to note that while we have widespread adoption across the globe in terms of Orchid registrations or researchers, we do note that there are some significant gaps from an organizational membership perspective. And this highlights an aspect of diversity, equity, and inclusion that we're addressing via our board's membership and fees committee. They're currently analyzing options for improving accessibility of membership in some lower income countries so that we can improve that representation as well. We also know that there's a strong correlation between a country's overall adoption rate and the level of national coordination of their PID strategy. Currently, there is a combined total of 26 policies across 11 countries that recommend adopting Orchid as part of their coordinated PID strategy, with more being added all the time. And we understand that each of these policies can have wildly different implications on stakeholders, but we take this in confidence, and that these countries have enough confidence in Orchid, and we take that seriously, and we think it's incumbent on us to respond to that confidence by doing what we can do to make it as easy as possible for our member organizations to abide by these new policies that are being enacted in these different countries. So Ivo and Tom will talk a little bit more about the things that we're doing there as well. And Orchid was formed, as all of you, I think, are well familiar, to solve the problem of name ambiguity. But we've discovered that being a name-independent person identifier has allowed us to offer greater name flexibility, which inherently supports the very spirit of a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives that you see pretty much anywhere. We've been keeping our eye on recent policy developments from several publishers regarding name changes, and we really think that Orchid is well positioned to help out here. We have plans to participate in community efforts to develop norms and standards, specifically the NISO working group, which is being formed. And we will soon also be announcing our partnership with C4DISC, or the Coalition for Diversity and Inclusion in Scholarly Communications. We're going to be publicly adopting their statement of principles and promoting their toolkits for equity among our own member organizations. And while we don't really think anybody in the research infrastructure space currently has a clear way how to best address the needs of a name change, such as for the transgender researcher community, we do know that it's important to ensure there's a robust technical underpinning to any standards that emerge, so that the integrity of the scholarly record is maintained, and that people who change their names for whatever reason are not retrospectively subjected to unintended negative side effects, like the undercounting of their citations and citation databases and indices. A few slides earlier, with the map and the metrics about our members and yearly active records, I mentioned that we were shifting our focus toward helping stakeholders derive the most value from Orchid possible, whether those stakeholders are researchers or member organizations. In fact, these actually relate to two of the 4 themes in our new strategic plan that we've been working on over the past year that Chris mentioned. And this new strategic plan has been informed heavily by insights that we gained from our community. And maybe some of you remember earlier in the year, we conducted a member value research project to better understand what member organizations and consortia leads value about Orchid and what can we do to better help them achieve their own goals. We also surveyed Orchid record holders, gathering over, I think, 40,000 responses. And we also conducted some select follow-ups there. We used insight from this work to inform all these 4 strategic themes, as well as the activities within the themes, and to frame key choices that we need to make about our activities over the next 5 years, over the next 10 years. And a lot of these elements boil down to 2 basic points: reducing administrative burden and helping our members understand the impact of the research they are funding or facilitating. We're really excited to share this plan with you. I think it's going to be really useful for our members as they plan their own Orchid work and activities. So you can expect to see us promoting this new strategic plan in the Member Connect newsletter, the monthly newsletter, at the end of this month. So we're basically a few days away from publishing this. So we're really excited to share it with you. Ivo and Tom are going to be talking about more about strategic themes from a product perspective. But first, I'm going to turn it over to Chris to go over some of the historical perspective of publishers and Orchid.
Great, thanks, Julie. So if we go on to the next slide, I'm not going to talk very much, by the way, just a couple of slides. You know, it's great to see Howard on the call. Howard Ratner is now at Chorus. I think of as one of the 2 main instigators or parents of Orchid. along with Dave Kachalko, who at the time was at Thomson Reuters. And, you know, I think I found myself on both sides of Orchid. I joined the organization, as I mentioned, a year ago, but when I was at Elsevier, I was part of those early discussions. I was on the board for 9 years. So, you know, I've seen the whole history of this organization. It's great to see how much progress it's made. But I think a lot of people have forgotten that it really was the publishing sector that really instigated the discussions, realized that there are a bunch of kind of competing proprietary systems, some coming from commercial players, some from various kind of academic groupings. But what was really, really critical was to have a universal system that could get buy-in, adoption, and use from everybody, because, you know, identifier schemes are only useful if pretty much the majority of the community agrees to use the same identifier scheme. And the realization, and Howard, jump in if you think I'm misremembering any of this, but there was a pretty early representation that the only way that was going to work was to make a system that was open, transparent, community governed, and welcome to all stakeholder groups. So very early on, the publishers welcomed in representatives from academic community, from funders, etc. If we go on to the next slide. So, you know, the world is very different today. As Julie mentioned, we have, you know, great now participation from many, many segments. Publishers today only contribute around 20% of our funding, and the vast majority of our membership support falls on the academic institution. But that doesn't mean in any way that we think that the value that publishers can both contribute and gain from Orchid is any way diminished. And, you know, there's great participation and integration with Orchid already from publishers and publishing systems. Ivo will talk a little bit more about some of the numbers there, but we're, you know, almost the first use case of Orchid was to collect Orchids in manuscript submission. All of the major manuscript submission systems have Orchid integrated. A few years ago, there was a movement to sign an open letter indicating that publishers were going to require Orchid submission. 7,000 journals signed up to that. And, you know, I think one of the most important things is that how do we help publishers? Well, by having their Orchid records, and again, Tom and Ivo will talk about this, you can help your authors claim credit for their work and make sure that their work is unambiguously recorded on their scholarly record. What we're going to talk about a lot in this presentation is some new ways we think we can work together to address emerging issues. We know that integrity during submission and reviewer selection is increasingly important. We think that the validated metadata that we increasingly hold can help with that. We also know that a big problem for publishers is complying with OA mandates, transformational agreements. We think there's a piece that we can help with that, particularly the problem of figuring out who the researcher is affiliated with so that you can then figure out who might pay for the article processing charges. And we're also talking to a number of our original founding publishers and lenders about whether they can help with increasing the participation in Orchid in the global south and in lower middle income countries. So that's a little bit of a history recap from my point of view. And with that, let me now hand over to Ivo.
Thank you, Chris. History back to current situation and future. So I'll take you into a bit of a deeper dive into the values and workflows for Orchid for publishers. Next slide, please, Julie. So as part of our enhanced value proposition work by communications team, Julie's team, we're developing characters for all our various stakeholder groups to explain the value. So this is one of the characters. Please meet Louise Williams. She is a journal editor, and through her, we aim to show the benefits of Orchid for someone in her specific role and the stakeholders tied to that role. So a significant part of our first theme is increasing and clarifying our value proposition to the publishers. as well as the more traditional benefits of helping your authors claim credit for their work, reducing admin burden and recognizing peer review contribution. We've heard from publishers that they would like more help from Orchid in ensuring the integrity of the submission and review process. We believe we can do this by providing trustworthy information about researchers' affiliations and funding history. In turn, we know that our other stakeholder groups gain value from the reliable information about publication records that publishers in turn contribute to the Orchid records. We're also starting to look at how we can help with open access policy and total access management and compliance, again, by acting as an open and trustworthy source of researcher affiliation data. Next slide, please. So publishers are strongly integrated with Orchid and remain our largest contributor of activity data. We're seeing a continued upward trend as well, so that's really great, of course. And out of the currently 84 publishers we have as members, we have 67 who have an active integration with us. Through those integrations, we've seen an accumulation of 6.6 million authenticated sign-ins of unique users. And this year alone, we are expecting to see 3 million plus sign-ins by unique users. Our member publishers combined have also contributed to over 3 million records being updated by them. And this year, we actually expect to exceed 1 million unique records updated by our publisher members. Together, our member publishers have contributed over 28 million journal articles being pushed to Orchid records, as well as 1.5 million peer review activities. I just want to point out that these numbers exclude other organizations not classified as publishers. This is internal classification of publishers in our system, such as Crossref, who isn't accounted for in these numbers. Crossref, for instance, contributed to updating more than 2 million unique Orchid records and over 7 million works automatically added into the records. Next slide, please. So by integrating with Orchid and using our workflows, you as publishers can provide better credit to researchers while saving yourself and the researcher time and improving your metadata integrity. From user sign-in all the way through editing and a review process to the publication phase and subsequently discovery and reporting phase, Orchid integrations can help you with enhancing your metadata and increasing the integrity. Next slide. Loaded a bit slow. Yep. So better manuscript tracking system integration could deliver a smoother submission process. By having the researcher sign in using their Orchid ID, you make sure that you receive the correct Orchid ID belonging to that user, which in turn prevents confusion and helps prevent the creation of multiple accounts, which then in turn increases the integrity of your submission phase. And also know that you can always combine your authentication system with still connecting to the Orchid ID. They don't really rule each other out, they complement each other. Once you've connected to the user's record through sign-in and have that permission to read the record data and update the record data, you can use that permission to enhance your submission metadata further and use it downstream. You can use it, for instance, to pre-fill forms, which saves the user time and increases the integrity of your data, and ultimately reduces admin burden for everyone. Next slide, please. So researchers really love signing in with their Orchid ID and are increasingly asking for publishers to do more with Orchid. We've collected quite a number of tweets here for you to see. It's going to be difficult to read them all out loud, but they include values such as, Orchid saves us time by logging in. It's the ease of only using one type of sign-in versus trying to remember a lot of them or saving a lot of them. And the value of having their records updated by publishers automatically via our auto-update workflow. There's a couple of these that you might want to look at, but for instance, here, the one in the center, asking for all journals to allow Orchid.org sign-in, which is, of course, great if that would happen. Next slide, please. So both STM and Orchid align on their mission to advance trusted research worldwide. Part of our success in global adoption comes from our distributed incremental trust model and the fact that we are committed to keeping control of an Orchid record in the hands of the researcher where it belongs. 2021 is our 5th anniversary of Orchid's Trust Program. We're celebrating this with a series of blog posts that outline our thinking about how we balance the sometimes competing priorities of researcher control and data quality, while adhering to our values of openness, trust, and inclusivity. Next slide, please. As a publisher, you can use our trust markers to advance trusted research worldwide and improve the integrity of the research process. This can be achieved by implementing deeper workflows with Orchid and benefit from affiliation data added by the institutions, works on the researcher records that have been added by other publishers or repositories, and additional data such as other person identifiers and organization identifiers. And all of this trusted data can then be used further downstream in your own workflows. So our latest blog, which is linked here, is all about helping users of Orchid data determine for themselves which kinds of data they might consider to be trust markers for their particular use cases. That some records may not have a lot of trust markers and why they are very likely useful and valuable regardless of that fact. So if you have a minute to read that one, we're getting some good feedback from our members that it's really helpful for them. So if you have any feedback on that, that would be great as well. So the trust markers takes us back to the workflow slide. Next slide, please. Where you can see where these trust markers are part of the deeper workflows that you can use. So as you can see in this workflow, by getting authenticated IDs and gaining permission to the user records and the additional trust markers, this can then help you enhance your own metadata, which in turn helps you further downstream with the things that you want to do with that data, such as selecting peer reviewers, which is a common pain point as we understand it in the community, and updating the reviewers' records. And then also in turn, by depositing peer review data to those connected Orchid user records, the reviewers will receive credit and are then more inclined to review more for you. Next slide, please. So in June of this year, we also implemented improvements to the inbox notifications and emails, incorporating clear and concise messaging, which includes highlighting the type of notification that the users are getting. Orchid users now clearly see what the notification relates to, instead of simply just getting a message that there is something that requires attention. So for instance, they'll see a request that they need to provide permission to a member organization in order for them to update their record for them. This enhancement showed immediate positive results, with 85% of all permissions requests being granted by the user since we've introduced this, versus 64% of requests being granted prior to the enhancement. We're also showing a tweet here from Ed Pence, who you know is Crossref's executive director, about passing 2 million authors granting permission to update their record via Crossref's auto update integration. So concluding, I think the benefit is clear. Deeper Orchid integration helps both the publishers and the researchers, as well as the research community as a whole, by advancing trusted research worldwide. Next slide, and I think we're handing over to Tom.
Yeah, thanks, Ivo. So just to conclude, really, and then lead into some discussion and feedback, we believe publishers can increase the value provided to researchers, essentially helping them save time, best form filling, and getting the recognition and the credit they deserve. We can improve research integrity by using this validated data added by other systems and yourselves. We can reduce the complexity of complying with open access mandates and implementing other workflows. And we can help lift the trustworthy open research in general for everyone by contributing validated publication information to a trusted open data source ourselves. So yeah, I think next slide, Julie. I guess we'll open it up for discussion and feedback. So if there's any questions or discussion starting points you'd like to raise, please go ahead.
Yeah, I see a comment from Howard in the chat about Crossref auto updates. Yeah, I mean that's something that we worked on very early in the days of Orchid, and you know I think it's finally you know through us reinitiating discussions with Crossref, for us really kind of focusing on some good product management practices and improving the UIs on both sides. We're starting to see that get into the realm of acceptable uptake, which is really good. And just so everybody understands that, what happens is that if you collect ORCIDs during your submission process, if you pass those ORCID IDs on and you send your article metadata to Crossref, then what Crossref will do is send those ORCID DOI pairs to us, and then we'll notify the record holder, hey, Crossref has some new articles that they'd like to add to your record. Would you like them to do that? So once the author has done that once, then any new articles that flow through Crossref will automatically be updated to users' ORCID records, which again, we know that researchers want to do research and not press buttons to push metadata around the place, right? So that's key functionality.
I have a very general question or comment. I found this a very useful fresh up of everything that Orchid offers to publishers. It sort of mainly reinforces what I thought I already knew, unless I've been not paying attention enough. But I was wondering, do you have the feeling that there's certain aspects of Orchid that remain underused by publishers, or that really would deserve more attention and that they could really do more? And if so, what is it?
Yeah, and let me have a go at that, and then Tom, Eva, feel free to jump in. I think there's a couple of obvious things that, using the data in records to form fill during manuscript submission is a no-brainer, right? And at least one of the major MTS systems offers that functionality. We'd love to see all of them do it, but then of course everything in an MTS is configured on a per journal basis, so not every journal turns that option on. But it's crazy to ask somebody to type their affiliation into a form when you can already pick that up from the ORCID record. Similarly, we've had for a number of years now the ability for publishers to push peer review credit information into ORCID records, not specifically around which article somebody peer reviewed, unless the publisher has open peer review, but to just say, hey, this researcher contributed this peer review work for this journal in this year. I think all the MTS vendors have that, but not all the publishers have that capability turned on. And we think that can, by making the contribution that researchers make to peer review to scholarship through peer review more transparent, that can only help with the problem of attracting peer reviewers, which we know is a big problem for publishers. So those are some of the things that exist today. Some of the things that we're interested in working on in the future is, first of all, we mentioned this idea of using the validated data in ORCID records, right? So, we haven't explained this very well in the past, but you can tell from ORCID data whether somebody's affiliation has been validated by their institution or their funding has been validated by a funder, right? And we think that is going to be really helpful in helping figure out whether authors and reviewers are legitimate. Then in a more kind of
very small, sorry to interrupt you, but
yeah.
It raises a very small other question. How much unvalidated information do you have in the system?
So it depends by the type of information, and maybe I'll let Tom speak to that, but I just want to come back to one other point before I hand over.
Sorry for interrupting.
No, that's fine. The other thing that we're quite keen on doing is figuring out how to make it easier to get ORCIDs for co-authors. We know that's a major pain in workflow terms, and we think there are probably ways we could help do that once centrally in ORCID, rather than having to have every integrator build their own co-author metadata workflow. But Tom, let me hand over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So in terms of numbers, like Chris said, it really depends on what kind of information we're talking about. So for publications, works, books, data sets, things like that, about 20% of those have been added by the owners of ORCID records themselves. We call that kind of self-asserted data. So they've said, I created this thing. Whereas 80% of that is actually added by member integrations, things like Crossref, for example, but also publisher systems, indexes, these kind of systems, CRIS systems from universities. Yeah, so that's 80% of that has been added by our member systems. It's the other way around for affiliations. So we see about 20% of those have been added by CRIS systems, mainly adding these things, and research information systems at universities, whereas 80% have been added by the researchers themselves. And one of the reasons for that, I think, is that when a researcher goes in and they want to have a full kind of CV-like set of data on their record, they're backfilling. So they're going, well, I worked here in 4 years ago, I worked here 8 years ago, and they're backfilling these things. And obviously back then Orchid didn't exist, or they didn't have Orchid integration, so that information has to be added manually if the researcher wants to have it there. We're seeing increasing numbers of universities adding affiliation information. In fact, we've released a new product this year to help them do that if they don't have some kind of Orchid integration in-house. We've provided a new service where they can interact with it and update Orchid records for their researchers that work at their institutions. So yeah, we're seeing a growth there. The other ones we've got are things like the grants that researchers have received. I don't have the numbers in front of me for that, I'm afraid, but I can tell you that all peer reviews are added by external systems. So we don't let researchers say that they've added peer reviews themselves. And this is because it's impossible to verify unless it's an open peer review, and the vast majority are not. So the only systems that can add peer review are Orchid member integrations themselves. And that just brings you back to sort of a final point on this, is a lot of records are kind of a mixture of the two. And I think for most researchers, it's in their best interest not to lie on these kind of things, because they're just like, they've got a CV, right? And if they're found to be cheating the system somehow, that's can be devastating for their reputation. And they've got enough on their records that you can say this person did actually publish this paper with journal X because it's been added by Crossref or the journal themselves. So it's highly likely that these other things are actually true as well. And we've got a whole blog post discussing this topic that we published recently that sort of goes into the nuances of working through this kind of thinking.
Great. I see a couple of questions from Graham in the chat. Hi, Graham. 67 out of 84 publishers have active integrations. What are these? Are these sending metadata to Crossref? Tom, I believe these are the direct integrations, right, where a publisher has directly integrated their own systems with Orchid. So publishers who are just sending metadata via Crossref wouldn't necessarily be included in that count. Is that right?
I'm actually not 100% on that number. I think Evo might have added that one in.
Yeah, that's the internal records number. So it's not based on your data platform, and it would pertain to integrations that either read or write to the records. So it also excludes publishers who may only use sign-in, for instance.
Yeah. So this is member integrations rather than. So just to clarify on that, we offer member API services. We also offer public free API services. And some journals use those free services to obtain authenticated IDs and then include them in DOI metadata. So the records are actually being updated via Crossref rather than directly by themselves.
That's another question from Graham. What expectations do institutions and researchers have about the services that Orchid can offer via publishers? That's a really good question. I think that researchers just would like to have their publications magically show up on their Orchid records. In fact, I saw some feedback on our internal Slack today from another webinar that we did for some researchers who say that, hey, publications show up on my Google Scholar record automatically. Why do I have to, why aren't the same publications on Orchid? So that's why things like Crossref auto updates are really key. And I think one of our strategic priorities is increasing value to researchers. Making more things happen automatically by default is key there. We will always provide the ability for researchers to control everything at a fine-grained detail. That's part of our gaining their trust. But defaults are very important, right? And making it so that less buttons are required for the the most useful thing to happen at the least possible effort is really important. Institutions would love to have complete works metadata available for their researchers in Orchid. They often use Orchid to pull in data into their CRIS systems. They often use, or would like to use, Orchid data to be able to, in countries where there are kind of national research assessment exercises, to pull publication data automatically. So they have an expectation almost that Orchid should have 100% complete, accurate for metadata for every publication, which of course is a self-asserted system we don't always have. And one of the things we're doing with Crossref is to say, can we make it easier to kind of triangulate between Orchid and Crossref so that you can get the DOIs from Orchid and go and get the complete metadata from Crossref. I don't know if that answers your question, Graham. Was that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, that was really interesting. Thank you. I feel in the past couple of years I've lost a bit of touch with what Orchid's doing. So I've really enjoyed today, and I think I want to go away and have a look at some of the things I think you might have missed in the past couple of years. So it's useful for both those questions. Thank you.
Yeah. A question from Hilke to Ivo. We showed the data about how many sign-ins we get via Orchid this year. Could we say something about trends and growth of researchers using their Orchid sign-in to editorial systems or other systems?
Yeah, we could, but I don't have the numbers right now. Maybe, I'm not sure if Tom would have them readily available, but I doubt it right now. But yeah, we're definitely seeing an upward trend in usage of Orchid sign-in in all the systems, basically. And I said in the 3 million expectation for this year. I mean, we're almost in October, so pretty solid on that one. It'll probably be about 3.1 million. But that's the upward trend we're seeing. I don't know, Tom, if you have any additional numbers. Yeah,
and just a clarification on that 3 million number. So that's the number of unique users that have connected, not the number of sign-ins. So that's the number of unique users that have connected with at least one publishing system this year. Unique sign-in number is actually way, way higher. I can't pull out from manuscript submission systems as a whole. I could give some kind of insight by just picking one of the major ones and tell you the numbers on that. But we are seeing a huge amount of growth, and manuscript submission systems are by far and away the biggest consumer of Orchid single sign-on services out there by orders of magnitude.
Yeah, I think we've become a kind of a workaround. I'm sure some of you know this, right? For historical systems, for historical reasons, I think all of the major MTS systems were built with separate user databases per journal, right? And that, of course, makes no sense to researchers, where they've got to use a different login for every journal they submit to, particularly when a lot of these interfaces look exactly the same, apart from the journal logo in the corner, right? So they have a horrible time remembering which password for which journal. And Orchid just provides a solution to that. So, I don't think that was particularly a design case for Orchid when we started. But as you could see from that slide, right, we see tweets every week from researchers who are so frustrated with signing in to submit their manuscripts or complete a review, and just are pleading for everybody to turn on the integration. The other case I think we see as sign-in is, our sign-in services are free, as Tom said. So we see increasingly people building, free and open services for researchers, or even startups building new products for researchers. They just leverage Orchid sign-in system, because who wants to build a sign-in system? You can use ours. It's free, it's open, and it also provides this kind of institution independent but non-commercial sign-in system, right? So I think there's a reluctance to use things like Google or Facebook login in the world of scholarly comms. So we kind of provide a more kind of research specific but non-institution specific sign-in mechanism. Great. Any other questions? Anything we didn't cover? Anything that surprised you?
you don't mind me just jumping on without I'm halfway through typing. Chris, are the institutional assertions managed tightly enough that we could use them for authentication or identity management, or are they loose?
That's one of my favorite topics.
Oh.
And actually, Hilke and Ralph Jongen and I had an initial conversation about trying to figure out that a few months ago, and we just said we should pick that up. I think it depends on the semantics, right? So certainly, if you want to know whether a user is affiliated with an institution, you can absolutely use an Orchid validated assertion from an institution, and that's really, I think, what's most important in things like OA payment workflows, right? Because it usually is driven on whether the corresponding author is affiliated with the institution. I think it gets more tricky when it comes to, you know, accessing institutional journal subscriptions and things, because then you might have a different definition of the authorized user community. And I'm sure there are edge cases where somebody might be affiliated with an institution but not meant to be able to access the journal subscriptions, and vice versa, right? So it all depends on how tightly you want to kind of manage those subsets. And I think that one thing that would be really useful for us to work together on is to figure out exactly how do these things relate to each other, and should we make it easier for people to connect their kind of federated authentication kind of authentication with their institution with their Orchid validated affiliation, right? One of the things we don't do today, for example, you can sign into Orchid with your institutional federated authentication, but we don't automatically create the validated affiliation information. We could potentially do that in some cases. Again, not in all. We'd have to say to an institution, does that work for you? So those kind of things are definitely things we want to look at.
Okay, that's really interesting. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I have another more general question. You rightly pointed at the fact that STM is advancing trusted research, and we put a lot of emphasis on our trust and integrity program and developing more trust and integrity tools. Are there ways that maybe we overlooked in which collaboration with Orchid or using Orchid could help in detecting fraudulent submissions or other ways that sort of pollute the editorial system?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned this idea of using you know the trust markers, as we call them, in the data to say, do I trust this author? Yeah. Do I trust this reviewer? I think there are certainly other use cases we could talk about. For example, we quite often get asked, could we add a space for conflict of interest statement to the Orchid schema, so that people could publicize that, put it out there publicly, so they wouldn't have to. Again, it could be an open and reusable piece of information that the researcher only kept up to date in one place. The other thing, you know, we've experimented with is what we call kind of credentialing, where, for example, you know, there are cases where people have to complete certain training in order to be able to do human subjects research and access certain data sets. We've had discussions with a provider of that training to say, could they actually add that credential as a validated assertion to an Orchid record, so that then anybody applying for funding, that data could automatically be kind of picked up from us. And I'm sure there are other kinds of credentials that you know, publishers would either be able to provide or be interested in accessing, that we could act as this kind of open vehicle for allowing that data to kind of move around the system. Anybody else?
Yeah, maybe just a comment, Chris. Thanks for the ideas and indeed trust and integrity ideas as well. But you triggered just a different thought with me, and that is about the conflict of interest statements. I think it would be actually very interesting the other way around, that if a publisher has an author with a conflict of interest statement, that Orchid collects all those conflict of interest statements from everywhere where the author has published, so that there's a sort of an archive of conflict of interest statements for that author. Just you triggered that thought. I haven't been thinking about it, so maybe it's totally ludicrous, but or yeah, what do you think?
No, I think that makes perfect sense. You know, there are lots of these things where it can go in both directions. And again, because we have kind of provenance data on every assertion, you can tell who ultimately is standing behind that, whether it's something the researcher has self-asserted or some other organization has asserted. So, you know, we'd love to figure out how to have some conversations about that kind of stuff. Great. Well, we're nearly on the hour. We have maybe time for one more question if anybody's brave enough.
I think you were so clear that there are no further questions.
Great.
Let's give it one more chance. 3, 2, 1, 0. Without any further, I would like to really thank you for all of this, but I see you have an extra slide, so let's give that.
Contact details. Yeah, Ivo, do you want to just run through this?
Sure, yeah. So indeed, that this is just so that you know where to go afterwards. If you want to reach out to us or review additional information, Estelle Chang, who might have just left the call because it's near to midnight for her. She is our engagement manager assigned to publishers. So if you want to know more about becoming a member or how to deepen your integration, then reach out to her. Further information can also be found on the website. We have an Orchid for Publishers page, and then additionally there's a link to the workflow documentation if you really want to dig into the how-tos of setting that up.
Great. And again, just to say thank you for all your participation as a community over the years. Publishers were key to getting Orchid off the ground and are still absolutely critical parts of the ecosystem. So we thank you for all your support and participation, and love to hear ideas about how we can do more together.
Great. Well, let me then add another thank you for this very good refresh, and we shall be putting the slides and this whole session also on the STM website, and we'll mail it to everybody who registered, because we always get more registrations for these webinars than in the end turn up, but at least those people will be interested in it too. And well, thank you, and we hope to see you again soon.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
so much,
Bye, everyone.
everybody.
Bye.